Chemical reactions truly do some fantastic things. From the gigantic explosions as explosive gases combine rapidly with oxygen and create a fantastic display, to the simple chemical reactions going on in every cell in your body, making energy at a microscopic level to sustain you as an entire living thing. Chemical reactions are amazing. But how do we take something as broad as a chemical reaction and really wrap our heads around understanding exactly what goes on in different chemical reactions? Is there a way we could simplify things by grouping different types of chemical reactions together as a class or a group of chemical reaction? Well, in fact, there is. Scientists have recognized 5 different types of chemical reactions. In this lesson, we're going to explore the first 2, which in many ways are the simplest 2 types of chemical reactions. The first is a synthesis reaction, and then a decomposition reaction. We're going to take a look at a real example of a synthesis reaction. And in a synthesis reaction, what you're going to see is smaller units. Okay, it could be molecules, atoms, or crystal units. Smaller units that are going to chemically react and attach together to make more complicated units. They're going to make bigger crystals or molecules than they were at the beginning. So here's an example of a synthesis reaction, combining magnesium oxide with carbon dioxide and making magnesium carbonate. This substance, by the way, magnesium carbonate, is sometimes added to table salt to make it flow more easily out of the bottle. Table salt can very easily get wet and clump, but magnesium carbonate can absorb a lot of excess water, so it prevents salt from getting wet. So here are the substances that are going to react in this chemical reaction. We're going to start on the reactant side because that's the substances that we make first when we balance a chemical reaction. Here's magnesium oxide, MgO. And you'll notice that here I have magnesium oxide pictured as a molecule, which is fine when you're balancing chemical reactions. However, I'm going to picture it correctly as a crystal substance. And then CO2, carbon dioxide, is a molecule because it's covalently bonded together. These 2 substances are going to chemically react. They're going to let go of their original bonds. Notice that I start with 2 different substances, but these guys are going to let go of their original bonds, and then they're going to recombine to form a single crystal substance on the other side of the reaction. This is magnesium carbonate. Now let's just take a look at what we started with again. Here's my magnesium oxide crystal and my carbon dioxide molecule. Let's take a look at the left-hand side and the right-hand side to see if I have the same atoms on both sides. On the left, I have 1 magnesium, and then on the product side, I also have a magnesium. On the reactant side, I have 3 oxygens on the product side, 1 carbon on the reactant side, and 1 carbon on the product side. So as you can see, this chemical reaction is already balanced without adding a single coefficient at all. That happens with chemical reactions. When you need to balance them, you notice that actually they're already balanced as they are. So I don't need to add coefficients to this, but I want you to notice why this is a synthesis reaction. Do you realize that I started with 2 different types of substances, 2 different units, and combined them to make 1 type of unit? Here are some other examples of synthesis reactions. Notice that on the reactant side, I have more than 1 kind of substance, and on the product side, I have just 1 thing. There's one little thing you need to know about synthesis reactions. Sometimes synthesis reactions can make more than 1 product. These examples all just have 1 product on the product side. However, sometimes you'll have several reactants that combine together to make a really complex, complicated molecule or crystal, and then you'll have 1 little extra tiny molecule left over, like maybe it's water, maybe it's oxygen. The general pattern with synthesis is several things combining together to make something more complex. And sometimes on the product side, there may be 2 products, but one of them something really simple and one of them something really complex, and you still know that it's synthesis. If you look at all of these substances on the product side, those are pretty complex crystals and molecules that are being produced. All right, let's take a look at the other type of reaction we're going to look at in this video, decomposition, in which you start with something complex and it changes to something simpler. You start with a reactant that turns into several products. Our example from the previous video, potassium nitrate, is a perfect example of decomposition. We started with a potassium nitrate crystal. That crystal underwent a chemical reaction where it broke apart and recombined to multiple things on the product side. Okay, so once again, here's my potassium nitrate crystal breaking apart, recombining into several things. It recombined into a potassium nitrite crystal and an oxygen molecule. More than one thing. It broke down to something simpler, and we call that decomposition. Notice in my chemical reaction equation, I have one reactant that changes into a couple of different products. That's the hallmark of decomposition. I'm just going to clean this equation up by making the crystals look good, and then balancing it by adding coefficients like we did in the previous video. And then here are some other examples of decomposition reactions. Notice I always start with a more complicated reactant and break down into simpler products. That's what decomposition is. So now you should understand the first two simple types of chemical reactions, synthesis and decomposition.